Franco Columbu lifted a car with his bare hands. Most people would say that's impossible for a man standing 5'5". But if you were at Venice Beach in the mid-70s, you saw it happen. Franco didn't just look strong in photographs. He moved weight that made bigger men step back in disbelief. Arnold called him the strongest man he ever trained with. That wasn't a compliment for the cameras. Arnold watched Franco deadlift over 700 pounds at 185 pounds body weight. He saw him bench press 525 pounds with arms shorter than most men's forearms. The numbers didn't make sense for someone that compact, but there was something else that made Franco different. It wasn't just how much he lifted, it was how he built that strength in the first place. There was one training method Franco used his entire life. It came from his childhood in Sardinia. It carried through his boxing days, his powerlifting career, his bodybuilding reign. And almost nobody trains this way anymore. Most modern lifters have never even heard of it. The technique isn't written in training manuals today. It requires patience, odd equipment, and a willingness to look strange in the gym. But it gave Franco something that looked completely unfair. When he walked into Gold's gym, people felt the difference. His handshake could bend steel tools. His back looked like it was carved from volcanic rock. And when he moved weight, it didn't just go up, it exploded with a kind of violent control. You're about to learn exactly how he did it, because the method Franco used is still sitting there, waiting. It works the same way it did 50 years ago. But first, you need to understand where it actually started. Franco Columbu was born in a stone village in the mountains of Sardinia. The year was 1941. His family didn't have money or machines. They had hills, rocks, animals, and endless physical work. Franco's childhood was built on carrying things. Wine barrels from the cellar to the cart, firewood from the forest down steep trails, stones for repairs, tools for neighbors, sacks of grain on uneven ground. By the time he was 10, he could carry loads that made grown men pause. The villagers joked that he had the strength of 3 men, but it wasn't a joke to Franco. It was just life. What most people don't realize is this. That kind of work doesn't just build muscle. It builds tendons, ligaments, grip, and balance under awkward loads. When you carry a wine barrel, it shifts as you walk. Your body learns to stabilize in positions no barbell will ever teach you. Your lower back stays tight for minutes at a time. Your forearms burn from holding irregular shapes, and your legs adjust constantly to uneven terrain. Franco did this every single day for years. He didn't know he was training. He thought he was just helping his family survive. But his body was learning something most modern athletes never touch. It was learning how to generate force in unstable, real-world conditions. That foundation would become the root of his unfair strength. Because when Franco finally picked up a barbell years later, his body already understood tension. It already knew how to lock in and hold, and that gave him an advantage nobody else in the gym had ever developed. The Sardinian work ethic stayed with him forever, even at Gold's Gym decades later. Franco would sometimes train with odd objects. He'd carry refrigerators upstairs during his chiropractor work. He'd lift car bumpers for strongman exhibitions. Other bodybuilders thought it was showboating, but Franco knew something they didn't. Those awkward loads built a kind of strength that strict barbell work could never touch. And that was just the beginning of his method. Before Franco ever touched a barbell seriously, he stepped into a boxing ring. This was in his late teens and early 20s. He fought as an amateur in Italy and later in Germany. His record was solid, but what stood out wasn't his wins. It was his punching power. Fighters who faced Franco said his punches felt different. They felt heavier than they should have for someone his size. Other boxers didn't like trading with him. He hit like a man 20 or 30 pounds heavier. Some stories mention a heavy bag that Franco damaged during training. The details vary depending on who's telling it, but the point was always the same. Franco's compact frame could generate explosive, violent force, and that wasn't an accident. Boxing taught Franco something critical that most bodybuilders never learn. It taught him how to transfer power from his legs through his hips and into his upper body. Every punch starts in the feet. The force travels up through the calves, explodes through the hips, and delivers through the shoulders and fists. Franco drilled this movement pattern thousands of times. His body learned to snap all that power together in an instant. That explosiveness carried directly into his lifting later. When Franco deadlifted, it wasn't a slow grind. It was a violent pull that started in his feet and ripped the bar off the floor. When he cleaned weight, his hips snapped like a boxer throwing a cross. The boxing footwork gave him balance. The hip rotation gave him explosion. And the compact frame meant all that force traveled through a shorter, denser structure. Most lifters try to build strength by just adding weight to the bar. Franco built strength by teaching his body to generate force like a weapon, and that difference showed up in everything he touched. But even with farm work and boxing, Franco still hadn't discovered the full system. That came when he moved to Germany and found a powerlifting gym. Franco emigrated to Germany as a young man looking for work and opportunity. He took odd jobs and kept training wherever he could find a gym. That's where he discovered powerlifting. This was the mid-1960s. Powerlifting was still raw and underground. The equipment was basic. The gym smelled like rust and sweat. And the lifters were obsessed with one thing: moving the heaviest weight possible. Franco took to it immediately. His body was already built for it. The Sardinian labor gave him a strong lower back and stable core. The boxing gave him explosive hip drive. Now, he just needed to learn proper barbell technique. And once he did, the numbers climbed fast. By 1965, Franco was benching 300 pounds in the 154-pound weight class. By 1967, he squatted 441 pounds, benched 375, and deadlifted 507. Those numbers earned him titles across Italy, Germany, and eventually Europe. But what shocked people wasn't just the total. It was how he looked moving the weight. Franco's proportions gave him mechanical advantages most people didn't understand. His short arms meant less distance to press. His thick torso and legs meant more muscle packed into less height. His center of gravity sat lower than taller lifters. All of that added up to serious leverage. But there was something else happening too. Franco didn't just lift heavy once in a while. He trained heavy constantly. He mixed powerlifting with bodybuilding volume. He'd hit a heavy triple on squats, then do 5 more sets of 8. He'd deadlift close to his max, then do rows and shrugs until his back couldn't hold a pencil. Other lifters rested 3 to 5 minutes between heavy sets. Franco kept moving. He treated weight training like cardio. His heart rate stayed high. His muscles stayed full of blood. And his tendons got stronger every single session. This is where the unfair strength really started to show. Franco wasn't just strong in one lift. He was strong in everything. His bench, squat, deadlift, overhead press, clean and jerk, snatch, all of them climbed together. And that's because he wasn't training like a specialist. He was training like someone who needed to be ready for anything, just like back in Sardinia, carrying whatever needed to be carried. But even with all that strength, Franco still didn't look like a powerlifter. He looked like a bodybuilder. And that's because he never stopped thinking about muscle. He was building both systems at the same time. And that combination would take him all the way to the Mr. Olympia stage. Franco arrived in the United States in the early 70s. He moved to Venice, California, and walked straight into Gold's Gym. This was the original Gold's. The one with iron plates, chalk dust, and legends training in every corner. Arnold was there. Frank Zane, Dave Draper, Lou Ferrigno. It was the center of the bodybuilding universe. And Franco, at 5'5", walked in and outlifted almost everyone. Arnold stood 6'2" and weighed 240 pounds. Franco weighed 185. But when they trained together, Franco's lifts matched or beat Arnold's on almost every exercise. Arnold later said Franco was one of the strongest men he'd ever met. That wasn't hype. That was fact. What made Franco's physique so striking wasn't just size. It was density. He looked like compressed mass. His back spread wider than men 6 inches taller. His chest looked like a barrel. His arms were thick from shoulder to wrist. And his legs, while not enormous by modern standards, carried unbelievable strength. When Franco posed, he didn't look small. He looked like a different category of human. Other bodybuilders trained for the pump and the stretch. Franco trained for that and strength. He'd start a workout with heavy squats or deadlifts. Then he'd move into volume work. 5 to 7 sets per exercise. Short rest. High intensity. His muscles grew because they had to. The workload demanded it. And the heavy strength work gave him a foundation that made every rep feel powerful. But here's what most people didn't see. Franco had one unusual habit that separated him from everyone else in that gym. Arnold knew about it. A few others noticed, but nobody fully understood why Franco did it. And that habit is what made his strength look completely unfair. Franco's forgotten technique wasn't one single trick. It was a system, a way of training that blended everything he'd ever learned into one method. And it started with something most lifters avoid today, odd object work. Franco never stopped training like he was back in Sardinia. Even in California, even with access to every barbell machine, he'd still seek out awkward loads. He'd carry refrigerators upstairs during his chiropractor work and treat it like training. He'd lift cars by the bumper during strongman exhibitions. He'd do farmers' walks with uneven weights. He'd flip tires and carry sandbags. Other bodybuilders laughed. They thought it was just showmanship. But Franco knew those movements built total body tension in ways machines never could. When you lift a barbell, the weight is balanced. Your body follows a predictable path. But when you carry a refrigerator, it shifts. You have to adjust. Your stabilizers fire constantly. Your core locks in harder. Your grip fights to hold on. And your nervous system learns to control force through chaos. That's what made Franco's strength feel different. It wasn't just gym strong. It was real-world strong. But the odd-object work was only part of it. The second piece of Franco's system was something he called graded tension. He didn't use that exact phrase, but that's what he was doing. Franco was obsessed with controlling force through every single inch of a movement. He didn't just push weight. He felt it on bench press. He'd pause at the bottom and slowly press through the sticking point. On deadlifts, he'd pull with perfect tension from the floor and control the lockout. On rows, he'd squeeze his back at the top and lower with control. Every rep had intent. Every inch mattered. And that made his muscles and tendons unbelievably strong in every range of motion. Most lifters today use momentum. They bounce out of the bottom. They jerk at the top. Franco never did. He moved weight like he was sculpting stone. Slow when it needed to be slow. Explosive when it needed to explode. But always under control. That's what built the kind of strength that looked superhuman. The third piece was even stranger. Franco practiced what old-time lifters called microlifts. These were tiny, partial ranges done with extremely precise force. He'd load a bar with more weight than he could full-range press. Then he'd do lockouts, just the top 3 inches, over and over. He'd do partial deadlifts from knee height with monstrous weight. He'd do half squats with loads that would crush most people. Modern coaches avoid this. They say it's dangerous or incomplete, but Franco understood something they don't. Microlifts overload your tendons and ligaments in the strongest ranges. They teach your body to handle weights you can't move yet. And over time, that builds a rugged, dense strength that makes full-range lifts feel easy. Franco combined all 3 of these methods into every single training session. Heavy compound lifts, out-object carries, graded tension on every rep, partial overload work to build tendon strength. And he did it all with short rest and high volume. That system is what built the unfair strength. And almost nobody trains that way anymore. The technique practically vanished because gym culture changed. In the 80s and 90s, bodybuilding became about isolation and machines. Powerlifting became strictly about the big 3 lifts. Strongman became its own sport. Everything got specialized. Nobody was blending it all together anymore. Nobody wanted to look strange in the gym carrying odd objects. Nobody wanted to do partial reps because coaches said they were dangerous. And nobody had the patience for graded tension. It's easy to just move weight and count reps. Franco's method required focus. It required feeling every inch. It required staying present through every single set. Most people don't want to train that way. They want programs they can follow without thinking. Franco's system required you to think every second. There's a story from the old Gold's Gym days. Franco kept a small notebook where he tracked his tension work. He'd write down how each rep felt, where the sticking points were, how his grip held up. Other lifters saw it and laughed. They thought he was overcomplicating things. But Franco knew what he was doing. He was building a map of his own strength. And that map let him improve in ways other people couldn't. Coaches today avoid teaching methods like Franco's because they're hard to standardize. You can't write a cookie-cutter program for graded tension. You can't put odd-object work into an app. And you can't teach someone to feel force through every inch unless they're willing to slow down and pay attention. So the method got left behind. And most lifters today have no idea it even existed. But the proof of Franco's technique showed up over and over again. In 1977, Franco competed in the very first World's Strongest Man. He weighed 185 pounds. Most of the other competitors weighed well over 250. Some were over 300. Franco looked tiny standing next to them, but he didn't back down. The events included car deadlifts, car carries, bar bends, and a refrigerator race. Franco finished 5th out of 8. That might not sound impressive until you realize he was outweighed by 100 pounds in some matchups. His technique let him compete with giants. The odd-object training meant awkward loads didn't throw him off. The graded tension meant he could generate force in strained positions, and the tendon strength from partial work meant he could handle massive weights even in bad leverage. The refrigerator race ended badly. Franco's knee buckled under the awkward load on uneven ground. He tore ligaments and had to stop competing in strongman events. But even that injury proved something. Franco pushed his body to the absolute limit because his method had taught him to trust his strength. Most people would have quit before their knee gave out. Franco's system gave him the confidence to push further. Outside of competition, Franco's unfair strength showed up in everyday life. During his years working as a chiropractor, he'd carry patients' furniture upstairs. He'd move refrigerators and washing machines without help. Other chiropractors needed 2 or 3 people. Franco did it alone, and he did it in his 50s and 60s. The strength didn't fade because it was built on a foundation that doesn't rust. There are stories from Gold's Gym about Franco bending tools by accident, wrenches that snapped in his grip, bars that stayed slightly bent after he used them. Some of it might be exaggerated, but the core truth remains. Franco's hands, forearms, and upper body had a kind of crushing strength that felt different. It came from years of awkward carries, controlled tension, and overload work. And nobody else trained exactly that way. When Franco won the Mr. Olympia in 1981, he was 40 years old. He'd come back from a serious knee injury. Most people thought his career was over. But Franco's training system had built durability. His tendons were thick. His ligaments were strong. His nervous system knew how to recruit every fiber. And his mind never doubted what his body could do. He stepped on stage and beat men 10 years younger. That's not luck. That's the result of a method that works. Franco Columbu's legacy isn't just about the titles or the numbers. It's about a style of strength that feels lost now. Older lifters who trained in the 70s and 80s remember that era. They remember when strength wasn't just about moving a barbell in one direction. It was about being strong in every direction. Strong with awkward objects. Strong with control. Strong in ways that translated to real life. That kind of strength came with pride. It wasn't just about looking good. It was about being capable. Franco could lift a car, carry a refrigerator, deadlift 700 pounds, and pose on stage, all with the same body. That's what his technique built. And when you talk to people who trained in that era, you hear the same thing. They miss that style of training. They miss the feeling of building something real. Franco's method didn't disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because it required more effort than most people want to give. It required patience, focus, and a willingness to look different in the gym. But it's still there. The principles haven't changed. Odd object work still builds stability. Graded tension still strengthens every inch. Partial overload still builds rugged tendons. And blending it all together still creates unfair strength. The verdict is simple. Franco Columbu wasn't just strong. He was craft strong. His technique blended old-world labor, boxing precision, powerlifting tension, and micromotor control into one complete system. That system gave him strength that looked impossible for his size. It carried him through injuries. It built a physique that still looks impressive today. And it proved that the best kind of strength isn't built with one method. It's built with all of them. Franco's legacy lives on in the people who remember what real strength looked like. It lives on in the lifters who still carry odd objects and train with intent. And it lives on in anyone willing to slow down, feel the weight, and build something that lasts. That's a technique nobody uses today. But it's still waiting for anyone brave enough to try it. Franco passed away in Sardinia in 2019. He'd come full circle, back to the island where it all started, back to the hills and stones that first built his strength. And somewhere in those mountains, his method is still alive, waiting for the next person willing to carry the weight.